sorry about that. Okay, go ahead.
And so we went to Boulder, Colorado, and stayed with my grandmother for a few months, who didn't really want us there. Yeah, and the father had died when I was 5, and that was the first time I saw my daddy cry. Anyway, we went back there and stayed a while, and all I can remember is she wouldn't give us any grapes. Well, I don't remember. I guess they just said that because I was only about 3.
Yeah, 3-year-olds really like grapes.
And so then we went home, and when I was 10, we went back to Boulder, Colorado, and my father had bought a 40 Ford, standard Ford, brand new, and so
Wow.
and so he sent my brother, who was 11, up to my Aunt Fanny's house, this a farm she had, and then the 3 of us went back there in the new car, and we had a lady that paid her expenses, so we had 4 of us in there, and we drove to. His brother lived in Denver, and then we drove to his mother's house in Boulder, and stayed there a few days, and my mother disappeared because she was going to have a church meeting, and they didn't want to stay there, and so, but I did, so I waited for this big church meeting, and they had a whole bunch of people on this corner lot, and on the front porch, and they all came up and talked in tongues.
How old were you?
10.
Oh,
But I got to see the whole thing, It was kind of exciting to be able to see all those people coming up and saying, I'm going to be saved and all that, and then they started all talking different tongues.
Wow.
And so that's why my mother and father escaped that day. And so then on the way home, we had Mom and Dad and me, and we brought Althea home with us. And she was 21, and she lived with us about a year, and so she was close to us because of that year, I guess. Then she moved to Portland, where her mother lived. Anyway, so that's Althea's story.
Wow.
So then I came home to talk about going to school. I went to Roosevelt School when I was in the 3rd grade. And
Where was it?
Roosevelt School here in San Leandro.
Oh, okay.
And when I was in the 3rd grade, and it was really, I was a show-off. And so every time they had an amateur hour at school, I would get up and do a dance.
Oh. Did you
Some-
go to dance class, or you were just making up your own moves?
I had about 3 months of dance class, so I knew how to tap a little bit.
Oh.
So I'd make up my own tap dances, and I did that for years. I was very jealous of a girl in my class that had costumes and really danced,
Yeah.
And she didn't do that as long as I did. And I got into the 6th grade, and I quit dancing, so I was going to have a magic trick. And so I got this girl, explained the whole thing to her, that when I gave her the quarter and covered it with this, she was supposed to take it out of my hand. So I don't remember all the details, but I explained it all to her, but she didn't do it. It's a complete failure with my magic trick.
Oh no!
Yeah, and then I went to San Leandro High, where the junior high and the senior high both, and I had a good life.
Yeah.
It was worked out good. So that was the main thing I want to tell you about my birth and my high school.
Yeah. Didn't you meet Clint Eastwood?
Oh yeah, talk about him. When I was 14, I went to Farley swimming pool, and I kind of hung out there, and I had a good figure at 14, and I met this really cute guy. He was so handsome, 14 years old, and he had an older friend that was old enough to drive a car, and so that night I had to babysit for 5 kids, about three houses down the street. And the boys came to see my mother, and my mother told them where I was. And so they came in, and luckily, all the kids were asleep already.
Oh.
5 kids. It started with 5, 4, 3, and twins.
Oh.
And so they were all asleep. So these boys came in the house, and I think we talked about dogs. And then one said, let's go outside for a little walk. And so, the kids were all asleep, so I went outside.
You go to jail for that now.
Yeah. So we went down there to about a half a block down the street, and came back, and I just remembered his name because at that time he was Harry Eastwood.
Mm-hmm.
His father's name was Clint. And so.
But he put his arm around you. Don't forget that part.
Did he? Did he put his arm around? Anyway, I sure knew him, and then I followed his name all the rest of the time. I kept asking people at Castlemont because he moved around. Later on, they had a big article about how many times he moved around, and so I thought he went to Castlemont High. Nobody ever knew him, and so finally, when I saw this article, he moved around, and finally he graduated from Oakland Tech, and
downtown, huh?
yeah, and then I heard later on that was somebody found him in the Army because he looked like he needed to be an actor. So he really has done well all this time.
Yeah, he sure has.
Yeah.
Now tell me about when you met Grandpa.
Well, when I met Grandpa, we worked at the same company, and I was a messenger girl, and Rich was in the office where the men were, and there never were any women working at the same time the men were.
What kind of office was it?
It was Arabian American Oil. It was a subsidiary of Standard.
Oh.
It was an engineering office where we were following the orders placed on goods coming from America over to the drilling operations in Saudi Arabia.
Oh, wow.
So we were kind of expediting and trafficking materials to get it over there on time.
Oh.
So one day I noticed he was good looking, and we were in the elevator together. And so we both got out of the elevator, and there was a little room and another door to get in, and he just did this swashbuckling thing. and
I swashed my buckles.
and that's how I met him.
With a flourish, I opened this double door. I opened the door for her, gave her a great big flourish, and she was mine from there.
Tell the story about how Elsie liked him and was always entertaining
Oh
him.
yeah, Elsie fell in love with him too, and so did my dad because, and so Elsie would invite him to dinner all the time and talk to him when I wasn't home. And encourage him. She really liked him.
We got along very well, yes. And Dolores' dad was the source of a lot of good humor, accidentally. Like one night he said we had dinner. Your mother cooked a nice dinner, and there must have been 8 or 10 people there. And her dad said, Elsie, he said, that was a delicious dinner. He said, well, thank you. And he said, what was it? He's forgotten what it was. It was like it was either chicken or beef, and he said, "What was it?"
Whatever it
Well,
was.
sometimes she had 2 or 3 things for
Yeah.
meat.
Oh my gosh. I remember her dinners.
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah, I remember applesauce. Her applesauce was so good. And the big
Yeah.
old chunks, like homemade applesauce, the big chunks, and sitting at the table all long, and all the flowers. And
Yeah.
Her dad had a way of sometimes misconstruing old statements or facts. Like he said, one of his favorite movies was Shootout on the Oak Ridge Canal, which you know what he meant, don't you? The Oak.
Go ahead.
Oak Ridge Corral. You know? Well, he got pretty close to it, but I got a big kick out of his changing of basic things. Like one of his favorite football players was Bill Dudley, and he was a fast halfback for the 49ers. And he was so good that they called him Bullet Bill Dudley. And I was at a game with the 49ers in Kezar Stadium, and I went to a lot of games with Dolores' dad. And he got excited when Bill Dudley had the ball and was running like mad and was going to score a touchdown. And Gene jumped up and he yelled, he said, "Go get him, Bill Dudley." He had the name wrong, but everybody cheered.
he knew what he was talking about.
Okay, let Dad tell some Richey stories.
Well, yeah. Let me come over here.
So you get to tell your story from birth up until meeting Mom.
You know, that's easy. I was born on a hot summer day, May 30th, 1924. As a matter of fact, since you mentioned that, I remember my dad talking about that. It was up in Ukiah, of course, in my hometown. My folks had a home there, and she was under doctor's care. And one Sunday afternoon, it was the end of May 30th, it was kind of a hot day, so she said, "I'd like to go for a little drive." So they got in the car and took a drive up Highway 101 up towards the Willets. And she said, "Oops, I think it's time." So they hurried back, and they only got as far as our house. And they put her in the house, and they called the doctor. This was on a Sunday. He wasn't at home. I mean, he wasn't in his office. So they located him, and I was born in the front bedroom of our house in Ukiah.
Wow.
In 1924. And from there on, it was just an extraordinary career. Unbelievably fantastic. So I grew up in Ukiah. Left there when I was 18. I went into service. I guess one of the remarkable things that happened was, of course, the bombing of Pearl Harbor. I was a senior in high school at the time. This was December 1941. And I graduated the following June. So I was a senior in high school, and my mom and dad and I had gone to a restaurant and heard about the bombing of Pearl Harbor on that Sunday morning around 11 o'clock or so, as I recall. And of course I wanted to take off and take on the whole Japanese war industry myself, you know. But I settled for taking a lookout job up in the mountains west of Ukiah. What happened is that one of the concerns was that the Japanese, having attacked Pearl Harbor, that they would come to the West Coast. And so a blackout was installed in San Francisco. It blacked out every night. Guard stations were set up to watch for landing of Japanese military craft. And so that's one of the jobs I had, was to go up in the top of a mountain west of Ukiah and be a lookout for Japanese invasion troops or equipment or guns. And I don't know, I guess you have to try to realize the mindset. It sounds kind of silly now to be sitting up there waiting for something to happen, but that's what we did. There were other guys that did this. We were expecting the Japanese to follow up the attack on Pearl Harbor by attacking California, which they didn't do.
But you weren't in the military yet, so did somebody pay you, or were you a volunteer?
Pardon?
Were you a volunteer, or?
Oh yeah, volunteer, yeah. Because I wasn't in the service yet. I was doing this when I was still in high school. Yeah. You know, after school or on weekends, I'd go up there and be a lookout. But as the war moved along into the 40s, I graduated from high school in June of 42, and in May 30th I became 18, and that allowed me to volunteer for the service. So I graduated from high school. I couldn't volunteer until I graduated from high school, and I roared down to Hamilton Field, Army base over by Petaluma, California, and applied for training as an aviation cadet, and which I was able to do, but they had so many people crowding into military bases that they don't call you up right away, so it was a few months before I was called up to start my training, which began within a few months of that enlistment. And with a little luck here and there, I got through the next 3 years and settled back in Ukiah, and did some traveling from there, including trips down to San Francisco quite often, in Southern California, trying to find means of getting settled. I went back to college at Cal, Berkeley, and stayed there until I got so anxious to get back flying again, and I took a job flying out in Buchanan Field, and spent the next year or two flying again, and then ran into a beautiful little girl over in San Francisco, and we got married in 1949. And she took the story from there, which is probably a better story than I could tell, because I was just...
Tell the story about your dad that you told Gary yesterday.
My dad was quite a hunter and fisherman, and he did a lot of hunting with people from Ukiah. A good friend of his was a justice of the peace, Will Van Dyke. He looked like Abe Lincoln and talked like him. This is John Van Dyke's dad. He and my dad were great friends, and they had the attorney, Mendocino County attorney was, the judge, the Superior Court judge was named Lilbert Gibson. He and my dad and Will Van Dyke and one other guy, I think he was a banker in town, and I've forgotten his name, they used to go up in the mountains north of Ukiah, up into the Mendocino area for fishing trips or hunting trips. And one time they were going up in the fall for a deer hunting trip. And my dad, probably of that group, was the one most experienced with the terrain and the kind of country that they were going to be hunting in. So he agreed to go out and do the scouting to find where we might locate some game. So they were back at the camp one afternoon, and they looked up the hill, and they said, there's a hunter way up on that peak over there. And he's waving his hat, and Will Van Dyke said, yeah, he said, Will Van Dyke talked like Abe Lincoln. He said, that's Roy Richey. And they said, well, how do you know that? He's way over there. That's some distance away. He said, when he took his hat off, the sun glazed on his bald head, and I knew that was Roy Richey. Of course, he was right.
Oh, that's funny.
So my dad was a great guy to go hunting with, because he was always knew where he was. I could not believe that. I'd get up early after several ranges of walking and hiking and up and down.
Yeah.
You get a little bit confused. He never did. He always knew exactly where he was and knew how to go.
Okay, tell him about how he learned how to be a mechanic because he started out with horse and buggy.
Well, when he was born in 1891, horse and buggies were very much in style, and the automobiles came into use about 10 to 12 years later. So he was a young boy when automobiles started to become a real attraction to a guy that's been riding horses all the time. And so he was fascinated by the prospect of automotive vehicles. So he pursued that down to Los Angeles and went to an auto mechanic school so he could learn about automobiles. And while he was there, he came in contact with a man who, with his wife, wanted to take a trip down into Mexico, all through Southern California and down into Mexico. And they wanted somebody that was a dependable driver to act as a chauffeur. Great for my dad. That's exactly what he wanted to do too. So that was his first job, and they had the car. They bought a car, and he drove them all down through Southern California, all through Mexico, wherever they wanted to go, for quite a few weeks of just traveling and exploring. And it was a good experience for all of them. He didn't know what he was doing, but he sure did a good job. They were happy. He'd never been there before. Never had a car before.
Wow, how fun.
But he was adventurous, and he loved automobiles. He wanted, about that time or a little earlier, he wanted to go back and become a race driver. Because cars were popular and racing was pretty popular at that time. And I don't know who it was, somebody would have good sense, it might have been his dad, talked him out of that because they were
Dying.
quite a few guys were buying the farm back there, you know.
Right.
And so he didn't do that, and instead he went, as I say, down to Los Angeles and went to auto school. And what was the point I was going to?
He came home and became an auto mechanic.
Yeah, but
Well, tell how many brothers and sisters he had, and what brought them to Ukiah.
my grandfather Mitchell came from Indiana with a family of 12 children, nine boys and 3 girls.
No. Your grandfather, you said Mitchell. You meant
Did I say
Richey.
Mitchell?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Richey.
Well, we'll have to erase that. And then Grandpa Richey came from Indiana. My Grandpa Mitchell came from Cornwall, England.
yeah.
And he came from a big family too. I could go back to that for a moment. My Grandpa Mitchell was the 20th or 21st
21st
child
of one man.
of one father.
Wow.
I don't know.
He married and had 10 kids with his first wife died, and his second wife had 11 more.
Those are big families.
That's a fertile guy.
So that's a lot of babies.
It sure is. And so Grandpa Richey came out from Indiana, and he stopped. I guess he wanted to travel west. He was adventuresome and restless, and I don't know how many kids he left Indiana with, as opposed to how many he had along the way. But my dad was 2 years old when they were in Arkansas. They had gone that far, and my dad was about the middle of the 12 children. He was about in the middle age-wise, or birth-wise. So I guess they must have had about 5 or 6 kids when they were in Arkansas. And then one of the things that you read about nowadays, a tornado hit in Arkansas. And his mother came running out of the house with her 2-year-old son in her arms, was going down into the storm cellar. And before she got there, the tornado hit him and blew my dad out of my grandmother's arms out into the field,
Oh, what a nightmare.
and the storm hit, and it was hard to see or do anything, and raining hard. Pretty soon they found my dad sitting out in the rain, 2 years old, and he said, "It's raining." Raining. At least he knew what was happening. And he was soaking wet, but they checked him over, his legs and arms, you know, and they thought he was fine. Well, he wasn't. They couldn't tell it at the time from just checking his limbs, but he had landed on the shoulder. It's his right shoulder, and I guess it either broke something or damaged something in his shoulder, which
Well, he had to have shoulder pads or different things when he.
it misshaped his shoulder, but it didn't influence. He could do everything.
Yeah.
So the reason I mentioned this is years later came World War I, and he went down to get into service like all his buddies and relatives were doing. And he went to the Army, and they checked him out and said, "No, that shoulder's not right. We can't trust you. Can't trust it to work, all right." So he went to the Army, and the Navy, and the Marines, and he could not get into service, which is a blow because his brothers and
Right.
cousins were all going into service. And they all made a mistake because I went hunting and working with my dad. I cut trees with him and cut lumber and hiked and went fishing and played golf with him. No problem with that shoulder. But they thought because something was a little out of whack from normal, it got pushed out of shape a little bit, that he couldn't handle it. Why, he could work circles around most of the guys that were examining. I know because I saw him do it.
Yeah.
He was not tall. My dad was what you would call short and stocky, strong. His arms are like my legs, you know. He was real strong, short and stocky guy, and he could really work. I could never keep up with him. So size isn't everything.
Yeah.
He had some brothers that were over 6 feet. Yeah, my dad was, like I say, he was what was he? 5'8", I guess, 5'9".
5'6".
5'6".
Yeah, my father was 5'7.5". Yeah, my dad was taller than me. I used to say I was 5'6.5". Anyway, he was taller than me, and my mother was 5'5", I think.
Oh.
Well, my dad and I had a lot of good time together growing up because my brother was interested in automotive. I was interested in hunting, fishing, and guns, and so my dad had places to go with each of his two boys.
Yeah.
And my mother didn't get to go to any of them. She said, I know you guys like Sunday. People, when I was a kid, people worked. My dad, I think, worked 6 days a week in the 30s. And Sunday was your day off. And so Sunday, when the guys wanted to go do something like shooting or fishing or something, and my mom she was pretty good. She'd say, I know you guys want to get out and do something, you go ahead. But then next Sunday, we'd take my mom someplace. Because she was kind of strapped there in the hot summer days in Ukiah, too. But it was a good small town growing up experience that I had. I graduated from high school in 1942 and went in the service a few months later. And
I remember the last.
never lived there since then.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
Well, I remember when we were doing this video before, you were telling us about the first time you were flying the plane over Germany at night, and my battery ran out.
Oh.
Maybe you could tell that story again.
Well, the first, as a matter of fact, what was interesting about that first night, that we didn't have enough night fighter planes, night fighter aircraft, which was the P-61 Black Widow, and they hadn't made enough of them yet to get them out to where the action was. So when I joined a night fighter squadron in France, they had just a few planes, maybe 3 or 4 planes, and they were used pretty constantly. So anyway, I got my first time to fly one of those because of the shortage of aircraft was at night over Germany. You think I'd had some training,
Yeah.
you know, down here, but no. I got to fly one down in Fresno for a few hours in the daytime, and oh, that's the interesting little thing happened. I was up in the P-61 getting familiar with it. For my time, sure, it was about an hour or 2 out of Fresno to get used to the airplane before I went overseas.
Yeah.
And one of the things you do with a twin-engine airplane is you got to learn how to handle it if you lose one engine. So I shut down the right engine. You know, I shut it down, and so I'm flying on one engine to see how it handled. And gee, it was remarkable. It was still very stable. Some airplanes, when you take a twin-engine plane and cut an engine off, it has a tendency to whip into a bad spin. But this one was very stable, and I thought that was fine. I went to turn it back on. I couldn't get it back on. I'm down there in the San Joaquin Valley, nice sunny day, and doggone it, I couldn't get the engine back on. And I tried and tried. I had the manuals. I even read the manuals and how to do it, and it wouldn't work. So I flew back. I went back over the field, and I called the tower at Fresno and said, I've got a single engine. I'd like to make an emergency landing on a single engine approach. And gee, they jumped into action. They canceled all the planes. All takeoffs and landings were canceled. All aircraft flying out of Hammerfield circle at 2,000 feet and wait for the emergency. So they got everything all ready, and I looked down there, and here's all the ambulances lined up.
Were you nervous?
We call them meat wagons.
Oh.
They were all lined up on both sides of the runway. And I'm coming in now. I've got a twin engine, rare, highly needed Black Widow night fighter plane, and I got to land that thing on one engine and not screw it up. You know?
Right.
So there's 2 things you can do wrong. You can come in too short with one engine, and you don't have enough power to recover. The other thing you do is come in too long, and you have to go around with one engine, which means you got to kill this attempt to land, put the power on it, and try to fly around with one engine and come in again. So I didn't want to do either one of those things, so I tried to get it right, and as luck would have it, I did. I came in with that thing, single engine, everybody's all focused out there, and I came in, and as luck would have it, I greased it. Just greased it.
Wow.
And I got up to this place up there and turned off of the runway, and a colonel came out in a Jeep, and I opened the window of the plane, and he said, Lieutenant, he said, that was one hell of a fine landing.
Wow.
It was. Better than if I had two engines. So that was kind of interesting.
Wow.
From there, I went overseas and flying one night. The first, oh yeah, that's what you asked about. The first night flying in a P-61 was on a mission over Germany. I'd never flown one at night before, which is no big deal except that
You can't see
you got to
anything.
find everything that you can't see. And so I'm flying along, and the right engine goes.
Is it the same as the other one?
Huh?
Is it the right side on the other
Yeah,
side?
well, it was the right engine. You have dual instruments because you got twin engine. You aren't going to have an instrument for every engine. So like your your speedometer, airspeed would show one airspeed. The RPM normally would be one for each engine put together, and one is marked L and one's R. So the right engine was going run, and I thought, I looked at it, it looked fine. But I don't know what made me do it, but I reached over, and there's 3 sets of controls on the left side of the cockpit: throttle, propeller, and mixture. Each have a button. So there's two mixture control buttons. I reached over there and hit the right button and made it richer. Stopped just like that. I mean, the problem stopped,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
not the engine. It just needed to be a little richer. And how I sensed that, I don't know, but I was sure happy because it was just humming away after that. But I'm, you know, over Germany, I don't want to.
Don't want to go down there.
The first night out, yeah. So outside of that, I didn't have any emergencies that required a bailout, for which I was happy. I got shot at a lot. I got the closest I got was a whole lot like that, about 12 inches from my foot, and that's about the worst I got. So I was pretty lucky.
How old were you?
20,
Wow.
and one of the advantages of flying at night, of course, they have radar to track you, but they can't see it. You know, daytime they can see a plane flying, they can pretty well get a shot at you, but at night it was harder to hit us, is what I'm trying to say, which is good, because I kept bobbing and weaving a lot anyway.
What were you doing when you were flying? Were you dropping bombs on them, or?
Cannons. Underneath the center of the center nacelle, the center fuselage, was 4 20-millimeter cannons. We also could carry bombs, which I did on occasion, special mission. But mostly I worked with the 4 20-millimeter cannons, and I liked being underneath they were underneath where you're sitting, so you didn't have any flare from the cannons. You could smell the gunpowder, which of course made it more real. But the plane was effective for ground control, and we supported Patton's Third Army move across from D-Day across France and into Germany. We were behind Patton's Third Army, and he gave us quite a commendation, because he said, I know that we all know that the day fighters are out there pounding away. He said, I want to give a special credit to these guys that are supporting our operations at night. And he gave us a presidential citation. I got a picture of him meeting with some of our night fighter people. And so that was successful in 1945, and when the war ended, that was kind of an interesting sidelight. When the war ended in May of 1945 in Europe, there's many thousands and thousands of troops over there. American, well, all the Allied troops are there, of course, but the Americans had to come home. The English probably lived pretty close, and the French and the Italians were pretty close to home, but we had a lot of Americans that needed transportation and the planning to get them home. So they set about in a typical style to work out a program to see who goes first and where they go. The war was still on in Japan, so we were down, and when the war ended, we're in Marseille, scheduled to go to China to participate in the war against Japan, flying P-61s out of China. The 61s were going to go by ship, and we were going to also go by ship. So we got on the boat and moved out of the harbor just after the Japanese bomb, just after the 15th of August, not the Japanese bomb, when the ship left the harbor. We're on our way to China. They got directions because of the turn of events. They just said, take that ship that's leaving Marseille and send it to New Jersey. That plane, we heard about it, cause we figured we're on the way to China, and the boat turned. We came out through the Gibraltar, the Straits of Gibraltar, and went to New Jersey. It's the best thing that happened, because we'd stayed there. They'd still been trying to figure out who goes home next, you know.
Was that because of the Hiroshima bomb that we dropped, and that's what turned you around?
Yeah, That's what I was trying to say. There were two, I guess, weren't they?
Hiroshima
Mhm.
and
Near.
there's a Hiroshima.
we have to erase this part of our bad history
Yeah.
lesson.
Well, yeah. That,
Two of 'em.
so anyway, that brought things into focus for us, and we eventually got back to a normal lifestyle. By 1946, 47, I was still doing some flying. I got my instructor's rating and gave lessons out at Hamilton Field in Concord for a couple of years, and went to Cal for a year or so, and then met Dolores in 1948 and got married in 1949. And the wild adventure slowed down a little bit, and I became more of a father.
Well, I want to hear about your wedding day, but so you give your version of the wedding, and then we'll get Mom.
Yeah.
Okay, could you hold that a little bit?